Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we are breaking down the entirety of the playoffs, all of the playoff schedules, week 21 to 23, week 22 to 24, and week 23 to week 25. I know week 21 is already over, but if that is your playoff schedule, I'm still going to be covering the remainder weeks of that, so this will still be very useful for you. And for everything else, this is just going to be the ultimate guide in terms of the best streamers, the best schedules, the worst schedules, and pretty much everything in between. What you want to do for this video is click on the section below that is applicable for you in terms of your schedule. So for example, if you have week 22 to week 24, you only need to watch that part of this video, and then vice versa for the other parts as well. I broke these down in the timestamps below. And also, if you have a bye, then don't worry, because I am breaking down the schedule, the ads, the streamers, and everything, not only for the entirety of the playoffs for someone that doesn't have a bye, but for people that have a bye as well. So yeah, this is an ultimate breakdown. For a lot of you, there's a lot of money on the line, guys. For me, if I don't win, I won't be able to pay my bills, but that's besides the point. For this video, what we're doing is focusing on the entirety of the playoffs in terms of making ads that is going to help you in the long stretch, in the long run. And basically what the strategy for this is maximizing your games with teams that have an easy schedule. As you can see right here, this is an example for the week 22 to week 24 playoffs. This is a comparison with JT Confer and Brandon Hagel, right? Brandon Hagel is a better player than JT Confer. He puts up more points, his deployment is better, but I want to make the argument that JT Confer is way better than Hagel for the playoffs because you're going to maximize your games with Confer over Hagel. Now, if you look at the games, you see that Confer has 11 and Hagel has 10. Now, this isn't a big difference at all, right? It's only one more game for Colorado. The key thing here is off nights. The off nights between the two, if you're counting the entirety of week 22 to week 24, is 8 versus 1. This could mean a lot more games out of Confer than Hagel. And yes, you might start Hagel all these games, but you might have to sit someone in favor of him. And that's not good for maximizing the amount of fantasy points that you get in a given week. Basically what this means, if you have Confer on your team, on those heavy nights, those Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, you're not going to have to sit as many guys as you would if you had players on teams like Tampa Bay. You could potentially gain 4 to 7 extra games from your players if you had a Colorado Avalanche player on your team over a guy on Tampa Bay. So not only is Colorado great for maximizing your schedule, but if you're looking at the comparison between Hagel and Confer, you'll see that Colorado has a much easier schedule throughout the playoff weeks. Specifically, I'm talking about week 22 to week 24, but this applies pretty much the entirety of the playoffs. Lightning have a really tough schedule. Just look here. Colorado's opponent record is .514, pretty good, versus Tampa's, which is .619. Colorado's opponent goals against per game is around 3.09, which is fantastic. Tampa Bay's is around 2.68. So overall for this video, I'm going to do my best to help you prepare for the entire playoffs and hopefully help you win your fantasy leagues. Let's dive right into it. To start off, this is for people that have their playoff weeks, week 21 to week 23. I know when you watch this video, week 21 will be over, but this is still going to be very useful for the people that got out of the first round or had a bye going into the playoffs. If we're looking at the best overall schedules for maximizing your games, we have the Avalanche, the Sabres, the Leafs, the Blues, the Capitals, and the Blue Jackets. Overall, the Avalanche have the best schedule for the 2 weeks that you have left. So if you had a guy on the Avalanche, you want to hold him for the entire playoffs. All of these teams have a decent amount of off nights. You can see they're ranked. Sabres and Leafs don't have the best opponent goals against average, but they score a lot of goals, so it's going to balance out. And in general, players on these teams are going to help maximize your games for the entire playoffs. In terms of teams with the overall least amount of games, we have 5 on this list. We have the Flyers, we have the Kraken, we have the Panthers, the Red Wings, and the San Jose Sharks. The Flyers have a really tough schedule, only 6 games and 1 off night with a pretty bad opponent goals against average. Same with the Kraken, not a lot of off nights. Okay opponent goals against average, same with the Panthers. And then even though the Red Wings and the Sharks have a good opponent at goals against average, they don't have a lot of games or off nights. So you don't really want to add any players from these teams because you're going to hurt the amount of games you have throughout the next 2 weeks. So you want to be able to maximize your games, and these teams are not going to help you do that. The highest opponent goals against average for week 22 and week 23 are the Islanders with a 3.35 opponent goals against average. Really solid. And then we have the Stars, the Knights, the Avalanche, and the Capitals. If you have players on these teams, you definitely want to consider keeping them for the entirety of the playoffs, and maybe pick up players from these teams as well if you feel that they're going to put up a lot of fantasy points. Not all of these teams are great for maximizing your schedule, but regardless, they are likely going to do really well. And then teams with the lowest opponent goals against average. We do have the Sabres, who have a great schedule for maximizing your games, but they have a really low opponent goals against average at 2.59. I know personally for me, I have Tarasenko on my team, and in my first week of the playoffs, they played the Hurricanes twice. I'm considering dropping Tarasenko for a guy like JT Compher, who has a lot of games against really easy opponents. So this is something to consider when you're looking at teams with the lowest opponent goals against average. You may want to drop some players on these teams and avoid picking players from these teams up. In terms of goalies that might be available on the market that you want to consider picking up, these are them because they have really low opponent records. The best opponent record actually is the Vegas Golden Knights. They have a .496 opponent record. So a guy like Adin Hill, who is injured right now, but I think he should be back soon, or Jonathan Quick, could be really good for getting you some wins and a lot of fantasy points. And we have Los Angeles goalies Korpisalo and Copley, who are splitting right now. Really good opponent record, and the Kings are an amazing team, so definitely like that. Then we have John Gibson, Elvis Merzlikins, who is away right now for a family emergency, but he should be back soon. There's no timeline. If not, then the backup goaltender on the Columbus you definitely want to consider picking up, even though the Blue Jackets are not the best team. Then you have Thatcher Demko, who is playing really well lately. The Canucks have a really easy schedule for the rest of the season, specifically for these weeks, so he's a great add and a hold. And then we have Ville Husso, Jacob Markstrom, and Stuart Skinner. They all have great opponent records, and they could give you a lot of wins. For the goalie drops, we have some goalies that face some really tough opponents for these last two playoff weeks for you. That is the Ottawa Senators goaltender. I put Sogard and Mando Leafs because Talbot is out. That guy's so injury prone, so I don't know if he's going to be healthy, but pretty much any Ottawa goaltender, it's going to be tough for them to get some wins. I know they're making a push for the playoffs, but they have a .660 opponent record, which is absurd. It is going to be tough for them to squeeze out a lot of wins, and I expect the teams that they're playing to score a lot of goals. Then we have Antti Ranta. I know he's a backup goaltender, but a lot of people hold him because he does get a decent amount of starts. Carolina has a really tough opponent record. Even though Carolina is one of the best teams in the NHL, it might be tough for Ranta to get the amount of wins that you normally expect him to get. If you can drop him and pick up someone from the goalie ads list, that's probably more beneficial for your fantasy team. And then we have the Buffalo goalies, UPL, Anderson, and Comrie. I mean, you definitely don't want Comrie in general. This guy let in 10 goals the other night against Dallas. But yeah, Buffalo goalies aren't the best, and the fact that their opponent record is so tough is definitely a no-no for me. And then lastly, we have Carter Hart of the Flyers and the Montreal goaltenders, Jake Allen and Montembeault. They're not great teams in general, and this only further proves that you shouldn't hold them with their tough opponent record. In terms of the streamers that you should add to help you maximize your games, I covered a wide variety of players ranging from like 85% to 10%, and this is because some of you are in 8-team leagues and some of you are in 16-team leagues, so it's going to vary. So how I rank these players is how good they are for fantasy purposes, and then also the amount of off nights they have. You might see a guy like Evan Rodriguez higher than a player that definitely puts in more fantasy points, but because Colorado's schedule is so good, Rodriguez is going to be a good option. I'm just going to read them off rapid fire. Valerie Nichushkin has played amazing lately. Colorado has such a good schedule. And the same can be said for Arturi Lehkonen and JT Compher. JT Compher is a really good option who might be available in a lot of your leagues. I know he's struggling in the past couple of games, but Colorado's schedule is so good, and he's in that top 6, so that's why I have him so high. And we have Alex Tuch, Jeff Skinner. That week 22 schedule for Buffalo is very good for maximizing your games. Then we have Pavel Buchnevich, Dylan Cousins, Victor Olofsson, who is on the first-line power play right now with Alex Tuch out. That is something I should mention too. Tuch is injured, so I don't know if he's going to be back. Could be back in the next couple of days, or he could be back in a week or two, but he still should be on this list because of how good he is. Then we have Jordan Kyrou, Patrick Laine, Michael Bunting, Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, Jacob Verana, who is playing on the first-line power play right now and in the top 6 on the Blues. He scored a goal the other night, so I think that could be a good option. Then we have Edward Rodriguez, Robert Thomas, Tom Wilson, Evgeny Kuznetsov, Braden Shen, Casey Middlestat, Alex Newhook, Dylan Strome, TJ Oshie, Boone Jenner, Kasperi Kapanen, Jack Quinn, Nicholas Backstrom, Kent Johnson, Calle Yarncroke, and Sonny Milano. All of these players are on teams that have a lot of off nights, which means a lot of games for you, and I think they're going to help maximize your schedule. These are defensemen that you definitely want to add if they are sitting on your market. I know a lot of them are higher rostered, so it depends on how many teams are in your league. But the fact is, they are playing teams that let in a lot of goals. So let's start it off with Noah Dobson of the New York Islanders. The Islanders have a 3.34 opponent goals against per game, so they are likely going to put up a lot of goals. Then we have Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Rasmus Sandin, Samuel Girard, and Rasmus Anderson. These guys are playing on teams that have really easy schedules this week, so I expect all of them to put up a decent amount of fantasy points. Now, the teams here are the teams that are going to help you maximize your schedule. This is ranging from March 13th to April 2nd, so this is for the people that do not have a bye for their playoffs. Let's start it off with the Colorado Avalanche, an amazing team for your playoffs. They have 11 games and 8 off nights. This is insane. Like I told you with JT Compher versus Brandon Hagel, guys like Compher are going to be very valuable. And they have a 3.09 opponent goals against average, so I expect the Avalanche to score a lot of goals while also helping you maximize your games. Then we have the Sabres with 10 games and 7 off nights. 4 of these off nights come from week 22, your first week. So yeah, that is going to be good for the first week, but the rest of the playoffs, their schedule isn't that great. However, I think adding players from this team and holding them could be beneficial for getting out of your first round. Then we have the Leafs, the Coyotes, the Blues, the Islanders, the Capitals, and the Bruins. The Bruins don't have a lot of off nights, but they have 12 games, which is valuable. However, if the players on your team are on teams that play on those heavy nights, then adding a player from Boston is not really going to help you because you're not going to be able to fit those players in your lineup. So it all depends on what your playoff team looks like and the roster spots that are open on those heavy nights. In terms of the teams with the least games, the least off nights, these are teams that are really not going to help you maximize your schedule. We have the Sharks, the Flyers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Kraken, and the Knights. You can see here, like the Lightning, they have a really poor opponent goals against average, but the Knights have a great opponent goals against average. So you might want to keep players on the Knights because they are likely going to put up a lot of goals, but you definitely don't want to add, players from any of these teams because they're not going to help you for streaming purposes, for maximizing your games. You're not going to fit players from these teams into your lineup. Now, these are the teams that have the highest opponent goals against average from March 13th to April 2nd. Again, this is for you guys that do not have a bye going into your playoffs. We have the Calgary Flames, the Dallas Stars, the Golden Knights, the Canucks, the Kings, the Oilers, and the Avalanche. These teams are going to score a lot of goals throughout your playoff weeks. If you have players on these teams that are already on your team, I would suggest holding on to them. Now, these are the teams with the lowest opponent goals against average. For you guys that do not have a bye, this is the entire playoffs, March 13th to April 2nd. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning with an abysmal 2.69 opponent goals against average. And then we have the Hurricanes, the Sabres, the Penguins, the Blackhawks, and the Minnesota Wild. You definitely don't want to have a lot of these guys sitting on your fantasy team, so you might want to consider dropping them and picking up players on teams that score a lot of goals or have really good off-night schedules. For the goalie adds and holds that you want to make for the entire playoffs, for those of you that do not have a bye, you have Aiden Hill and Jonathan Quick with a .509 opponent record. Then we have Copley and Korpisalo of the Los Angeles Kings. I think they're splitting starts moving forward, but they should rack up a lot of wins. Then you have Markstrom, Thatcher Demko, Stuart Skinner, John Gibson, and Jeremy Swayman. I think these goalies are going to rack up a lot of wins, which means a lot of fantasy points for you. Then for the goalie draws for you guys that do not have a bye, we have the Ottawa Senators goaltenders, Sogard and Mandolese right now because Talbot is injured, but Talbot would be included if he was healthy. They have a really tough opponent record. I know they're making a push for the playoffs, but I expect them to let in a lot of goals and potentially get a lot of L's. Then we have Antti Ranta. I know the Hurricanes are an amazing team, but he's probably not going to perform how he normally does. Then we have Alan Amontebo of the Canadiens, Samsonov and Murray on the Leafs. I know the Leafs are a great team, but the fact is Samsonov and Murray are probably splitting starts, and they are playing tough teams, so they're not good for maximizing your schedule, and they might get more L's than the Leafs normally do. Then lastly, we have any of the Buffalo Sabres goaltenders, UPL, Anderson, and Comrie, with a .583 opponent record. They let a lot of goals in to begin with, and now they're playing really tough opponents, so I definitely don't like holding any of them or adding them for the playoffs. Now, these are the streamers to add and hold for the entirety of your playoffs to help you maximize your games. I covered a wide variety of players because some of you are in 8-team leagues and some of you are in 16-team leagues. So it's going to vary on the available players that are going to be on your market. So how I rank these players is by the value that they provide for fantasy purposes and also off nights. For example, Buchnevich should probably be first on this list in terms of his value for fantasy purposes, but because Colorado has such an amazing schedule, he's lower. And the same can be said for guys like Evan Rodriguez and Alex Newhook, who aren't the best players, but because their schedule is so good, they are higher up on this list. So let's start it off with Nichushkin of the Colorado Avalanche. Like I said, Colorado has an amazing playoff schedule, and Nichushkin is playing incredible lately in that top 6 on that first line power play. Then we have Arturi Lehkonen, can say the same for him. Then we have Tuck, Skinner, Dylan Cousins. The first week of the playoffs, week 22, these guys have 4 games and 4 off nights. Really good for maximizing your schedules so they can help you get to the second round. And then we have Pavel Buchnevich, JT Compher, Clayton Keller, Brock Nelson, Victor Olofsson, who's on the first line power play right now with Tuck out. Tuck may be back, so that's why he's on this list, but definitely take a look at Olofsson, Jordan Kyrou, Anders Lee, Nick Schmaltz, Michael Bunting. Then we have Devin Taves and Bowen Byram. Amazing Colorado playoff schedule, like I said. Same thing with Samuel Girard. Then we have Robert Thomas, Braden Shen, Tom Wilson, Evgeny Kuznetsov, Evan Rodriguez, Casey Middlestat, Alex Newhook, Dylan Strome, TJ Oshie, Lawson Krause, Matthias Maselli, Kyle Palmieri, Kalle Yarncroke, Jack Quinn, and Kasperi Kapanen. Now, these are the defensemen that you want to add or hold on to because they are playing teams that let in a lot of goals. We have Rasmus Anderson, Evan Bouchard, Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, Noah Dobson, and Dmitry Orlov. Some of them might be available on the market if you're in a more shallow league, but if you have these players, I would definitely hold on to them because I expect them to put up a lot of fantasy points. Now, this is for the people that have a bye going into this playoff schedule, right? So week 22 won't matter for you. This is covering March 20th to April 2nd. We have the Colorado Avalanche still being the first place team with a lot of off nights, a really great opponent goals against average. And then these other teams also have a lot of off nights too. The Coyotes, the Panthers, the Oilers, and the Islanders. But the Avalanche are clearly the best team. In general, these teams are going to help you maximize your games and also rack up a lot of fantasy points because they have easy schedules. And I will cover the streamers in a little bit. These are the teams with the overall least games for the people that have a bye for this playoff schedule, March 20th to April 2nd. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning, we have the Knights, we have the Kraken, the Sharks, the Capitals, the Jets, and the Wild. Some of them have decent opponent goals against average, but you don't want to stream players from these teams because you're not going to help you maximize your games. And this was my example, right? Dropping a guy like Brandon Hagel for JT Compher, and I'm sure there's many more examples of dropping players from these teams and picking up guys from like the Avalanche, the Sabres, or the Leafs. Now, this is the highest opponent goals against average from March 20th to April 2nd. So if you have a bye, these are the teams you definitely want to take a look at. We have the Calgary Flames with an absurd 3.41 opponent goals against average. We have the Jets, we have the Oilers, the Stars, the Blues, the Knights, and the Colorado Avalanche. Hopefully you have a lot of players from these teams. Then for the lowest opponent goals against average, for you guys that do have a bye going into your playoffs, March 20th to April 2nd, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Penguins, the Blue Jackets, the Sabres, the Leafs, and the Chicago Blackhawks. You definitely don't want to have a lot of players on these teams. They might cost you your fantasy playoffs. Now for the goalie ads with a bye, this is similar to the goalie ads without a bye, but the rankings are a little bit different. Same with all of the differences between with a bye and without a bye. Now I didn't mention this before, but these goalie ads that I'm talking about, these are guys that could be available on your market, right? So I'm not including goalies like, Gorgiev, right? He has a really good opponent record, but there's no way you are going to be able to pick him up. So these are goalies that could potentially be on your market that have good opponent records also. So with that being said, Jacob Markstrom, really good opponent record, .507 on the Flames. Then we have Stuart Skinner, Thatcher Demko, Jordan Binnington, and then Aiden Hill / Jonathan Quick. Then we have goalie drops with a bye March 20th to April 2nd. Like I said with the ads, these are goalies that you can afford dropping. There are better goalies that have worse opponent records like Vasi, but you definitely don't want to drop a guy like him. So to start it off, we have Antti Ranta on the Canes with a .602 opponent record. Tough because the Canes are a great team and he does get a decent amount of starts, but I don't think he's worth holding on to. Then we have Sogard and Mando Lease of the Ottawa Senators. Talbot would be included if he was healthy. Tough opponent record for the Sens. Then Alan Amonteboe. Then we have Elvis Merzlikins, who is on a personal leave for a family emergency. So this would include the backup Blue Jackets goaltender if he is not back. But yeah, Blue Jackets are not a great team, and now they have a tough opponent record. Definitely not worth holding or adding. And then finally, we have Ingram and Vejmelka of the Arizona Coyotes. Not the greatest team, obviously, and they have a tough opponent record, so that's a no-brainer to drop. Now, for you guys that do have a bye going into the playoffs, this is going to look a little different, right? This is March 20th to April 2nd. I mentioned Buffalo Sabres having a really good schedule for the first week, week 22, but if you have a bye, their schedule is not as relevant. So, yeah, let's look at this list. Valeri Nichushkin, Arturi Lekin, and JT Compher. Colorado still has an amazing playoff schedule if you have a bye. Then we have Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz, Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, Evander Kane, Evan Rodriguez, Carter Verhaeghe, Brock Nelson, Honors Lee, Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, Evan Bouchard, Alex Newhook, Eetu Listerainen, Lawson Krause, Matthias Maselli, Jason Zucker, and Brian Rust. These players you want to add to help you maximize your games because they do have a lot of off nights. Now, this list of defensemen is for you guys that have a bye going into the playoffs. Defensemen that you want to either add or hold on to. Looks pretty similar to the list for the people that don't have a bye, but the ranking is a little different. Number 1, we have Rasmus Andersson on the Flames with a 3.41 opponent goals against average. The Flames are likely going to score a lot of goals. Then we have Evan Bouchard. The Oilers are going to be really dangerous in this playoff stretch. Then we have Justin Falk and Torrey Krug, who both get a decent amount of power play time. Great opponent at goals against average. Then we have Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, Dmitry Orlov, who is playing on the first line power play for the Bruins right now. Incredible deployment. He is playing absolutely amazing since getting traded from the Caps. And we have Rasmus Sandin of the Capitals, who is also playing on the first line power play alongside Ovechkin. Very good opponent at goals against average, so I expect him to put up a lot of fantasy points. And yeah, all of these guys are going to be really good for your fantasy playoffs. All right, for the most games in terms of maximizing your schedule, this is ranked by off nights. This is for you guys who do not have a bye. We have the Colorado Avalanche with 11 games and 7 off nights, and they also have an amazing opponent goals against per game, and so do the rest of these teams on this list. And then moving down, we have the Coyotes, the Oilers, the Panthers, and the Flames. The Coyotes have 6 off nights, which is pretty good. Oilers 4, Panthers 3, and then Flames 3 as well. So in general, the players from these teams are going to be good for maximizing your games, and they're also going to score a lot given their great opponent goals against average. Then for the least games, for you guys who do not have a bye, we have the Capitals, the Lightning, the Jets, the Sharks, and the Stars. You'll see that the Capitals, the Jets, and the Stars do have a good opponent goals against per game for these playoff weeks. But the fact is they have like no off nights, right? So you're not going to be able to fit them into your roster. I definitely wouldn't suggest making any adds from these teams to maximize your games for the whole playoffs. And you might want to consider dropping players from these teams as well. All right, for the highest opponent goals against per game, this is for you guys who do not have a bye going into the playoffs. We have the Calgary Flames with the 3.35 opponent goals against per game. They are likely going to score a lot of goals. And the same will be said for the Oilers, who have the best offense in the league. They have a really easy schedule. So if you have a bunch of Oilers players on your team, you should definitely do well in your fantasy playoffs. Then we have the Avalanche, same thing can be said for them, the Jets, the Kraken, the Canucks, and the Capitals. If you have players on these teams, I expect them to rack up a lot of fantasy points. Definitely take a look at streaming them for one-night streams as well. Then for the lowest opponent goals against per game, for you guys who do not have a bye going into these playoff weeks, we have the Lightning, the Penguins, the Blue Jackets, the Predators, and the Hurricanes. I know teams like the Hurricanes and the Lightning do put up a lot of goals, but they are likely going to score less goals than they normally do. It might be wise to drop players on these teams and avoid adding those players for streams as well. For the goalie ads for you guys who do not have a bye, these are goalies that could be available on your market. There's goalies with better opponent records than these guys, but they're not going to be available in any of your leagues. A guy like Alexander Gorgiev has an amazing opponent record. So these are guys that are a little bit lower roster that you might be able to pick up. You definitely want to hold on to them if you have them on your fantasy team. We have Stuart Skinner of the Oilers. We have the Calgary goaltenders, Markstrom and Vladar. We have the Kraken goaltenders, Grubauer and Jones. And we have Thatcher Demko of the Vancouver Canucks. These are the goalies that you might want to drop if you do not have a bye going into the playoffs. We have Elvis Merzinglis of the Blue Jackets with a .607 opponent record. Blue Jackets are already one of the worst teams in the league, so he should probably not get many wins. He is away right now due to a family emergency, so this applies to the Columbus Blue Jackets backup if he is not back in time for the playoffs. Then we have Ottawa Senators goaltenders. Talbot could be included in this, but I think he's going to be injured for a couple of weeks. So yeah, any Ottawa Senators goaltenders you might want to avoid. I know they're making a push for the playoffs, but the fact is they have a tough road ahead of them, and I think they are going to let in a lot of goals throughout this process. Then we have Ranta of the Canes. Because he's a backup goaltender and he doesn't get the most starts, I think it's just not worth holding on to him with the opponent record that the Canes have. He's not going to perform how he usually does. Then we have Jari DeSmith of the Penguins. Tough opponent record. I just don't believe that they are going to perform very well. Then we have Alan Montembeault of the Canadiens. The Canadiens are already a bad team, so I definitely wouldn't hold on to them with this poor opponent record. All right, these are the streamers that you want to add for the entire playoffs, March 20th to April 9th. And this is for you guys that do not have a bye going into the playoffs. I rank this by the skill of the players and then the amount of off nights they have. You'll see a guy like Evan Rodriguez is probably a little bit higher than his skill would show him to be, but because he has so many off nights, he might be more useful than a guy like Carter Verhaeghe, who is lower than him on this list. But let's just go through these rapid fire. We have Valerie Nichushkin, Arturi Lehkonen, JT Compher. Like I said, Colorado has an amazing playoff schedule. I think they're going to be really good for maximizing your games and also putting up a lot of fantasy points. Then we have Clayton Keller, Evander Kane, Nick Schmaltz, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, Evan Rodriguez, Lawson Krause, Carter Verhaeghe, Matthias Maselli, and Nazem Kadri. And then we have Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, Jonathan Huberdeau, Evan Bouchard, Alex Newhook, Barrett Hayden, Mikael Backlund, Dylan Dubé, Eetu Listerainen, Andrew Mangiapane, Blake Coleman, and Kyler Yamamoto. This is a wide range of players, guys. I know it's ranging from roster percentages of 5% all the way to like 85%, but I needed to include this because some of you guys are in 6-team leagues and some of you are in 16-team leagues. So all of these players have really good schedules in terms of off nights and maximizing your games. So I hope adding them will help you win your playoff weeks. Now for the defensemen that have really high opponent goals against per game, we have a list here, and this is for you guys that do not have a bye. You definitely want to hold on to these guys or add them if they are available on your waiver wire. We have number one being Rasmus Anderson of the Flames. The Flames have a 3.35 opponent goals against per game, so that's very solid. Then we have Evan Bouchard, Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, Vince Dunn, and Rasmus Sandin. I expect these guys to put up a lot of fantasy points. Now, this is for you guys who do have a bye going into these playoff weeks. This is going to be covering March 27th to April 9th. This is the teams with the most games for maximizing your schedule. Now, these weeks are week 24 and 25, and there are not a lot of teams with a lot of off nights, so you kind of have to work with what you have. But still, even 3 off nights is pretty good if you're looking at the schedule. There's a lot of teams with 0 off nights. With that being said, we have the Avalanche, the Ducks, the Coyotes, and the Minnesota Wild all having 3 off nights. The Coyotes and the Wild do have 6 games, but still those off nights are valuable. And then we have the Oilers with 7 games and 2 off nights, but an amazing opponent goals against average. So in general, these teams should be good for maximizing your games, and most of them beside the Wild should be good for putting up fantasy points as well. Then for the least amount of games for maximizing your schedule, if you do have a bye going into the playoffs, we have the Sharks, the Blackhawks, the Lightning, the Blue Jackets, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yes, you definitely don't want to make ads from these teams, and you definitely don't want to hold on to a lot of players if they are on these teams as well. So you might have to make a tough decision and drop players on these teams. Now for the highest opponent goals against per game, for you guys that do have a bye going into these playoff weeks, we have the Calgary Flames, the Edmonton Oilers, the Seattle Kraken, the Colorado Avalanche, the Arizona Coyotes, the Rangers, and the Canucks. Players on these teams should do well for you guys for these playoff weeks. I expect them to put up a lot of fantasy points. Now for the lowest opponent goals against per game, for you guys that do have a bye going into these playoff weeks, we have the Lightning, the Predators, the Blue Jackets, the Penguins, and the Islanders. It's going to be tough for the players on these teams to score a lot of goals, so you definitely don't want a lot of players from these teams on your fantasy team. Now these are the goalies that you want to add or hold on to if you do have a bye going into the playoff weeks. We have Grubauer and Jones of the Kraken with a .480 opponent record. Really good stuff. Then we have the Calgary goaltenders, Markstrom and Vladar, Stuart Skinner, and Thatcher Demko. Then these are the goalies that you might want to drop if you do have a bye going into the playoffs. We have the Columbus Blue Jackets goaltender, Elvis Merzinglis, and if he's not back, then it would be the backup goaltender. You don't want these guys on your team with a .648 opponent record. Then we have Jari DeSmith, Gus, and Fleury. Even though they played really well, I just don't know if they are going to be worth holding on to. Then we have Ville Husso, and then finally we have Phoenix Copley and Korpisalo of the Los Angeles Kings. Now, in terms of ads to maximize your games, if you do have a bye, we have a bunch of players on this list, and like I said in the previous part, this is basically ranked by skill and then also the number of off nights. Really good for maximizing your games, and I'm covering a wide variety of players because some of you are in 6-team leagues and others are in 16-team leagues. So it's going to be guys that are 10% all the way to like 85%. You have number 1 being Valery Nichushkin. Then we have Arturi Lehkonen, Clayton Keller, Evander Kane, Trevor Zegras, JT Compher, Joel Eriksson-Ek, Troy Terry, Matt Boldy, Bowen Byram, and Samuel Girard. And then we have Mason McTavish, Evan Rodriguez, Lawson Krause, Matthias Maselli, Evan Bouchard, Ryan Hartman, Frank Vetrano, Adam Henrique, Jared Spurgeon, Barrett Hayden, Alex Newhook, and Kyler Yamamoto. I think these players are going to be great for maximizing your games and hopefully will help you win your playoff weeks. These are defensemen with really high opponent goals against per game. We have Rasmus Anderson, Evan Bouchard, Vince Dunn, Devin Taves, Bowen Byram, Samuel Girard, and Juuso Välimäki, who is on the first-line power play on the Coyotes with Chychrun out. I expect these guys to put up a lot of fantasy points because they are playing really easy teams. And yeah, if they are available on your market, definitely look to pick them up. Or if you have them on your team, definitely hold on to them. All right, guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said earlier, I'm still going to be doing my weekly guide videos, and that's going to be covering all the schedule stuff and the ads that you want to make per week. Those are still going to be useful because this video doesn't cover that. But this video is great if you want to make ads and look at the schedule for the entirety of the playoffs. It took a lot of work, and I just hope it's useful. Hopefully you can take this advice and win your fantasy leagues. I wish you all the best. Good luck, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Like always, have a good one.